All right.
Hello. Thanks for coming, Sam and Athea. We are going to get started in just a moment. I am going to put in the chat a link to a poll. It is possible that it's going to ask you for cookies, and if you want to create an account and you don't have to do any of that, you can go skip for now. And then it's just 8 things that you'll be ranking. So obviously, if it's higher up, it'll be a bigger priority in your life or something that's more prevalent in your life. And if you lower it down, then it is lower in your life. Hi there, Sam. All right, go ahead and click on the link in the chat if you haven't already. And if it's
Carrie,
accessible,
can we just pause for a second? One, I just want to welcome everybody before we dive in to our event. Just really quickly, welcome to Complex Trauma and Educators, spotlighting challenges and moving toward connection with our very own Carrie. Carrie, super excited for this topic today. And as you were saying, you had put a link in the chat. And so if you are watching this on demand, that link will be included in the links where you link to watch this video. So I look forward to ranking some of these things myself. I always like ranking activities.
perfect. Thanks, Athea. Yeah, my name is Carrie Rohrbach. My pronouns are she, her. I am on the board as well as an operational team member for the Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully. And I'm excited to do this presentation. So you can just listen with one ear as I kind of talk about an overview of our time together if you're still working on that ranking. So I'm going to start by talking about my educator journey over the last 15 plus years and how learning about complex trauma helped contextualize the challenges I faced in the education system. That will lead into the big why behind the necessity of sharing the impact of complex trauma on educators more widely. And then the bulk of our content will include background information regarding how adaptive survival strategies from childhood develop into adaptive survival styles in, I lost my place, adaptive survival styles that tend to manifest in educators in similar ways. And we'll conclude our time together with an exploration of skills for moving toward reconnection and self-acceptance with situations and experiential practice. And I encourage you to keep track of any questions that you have, and hopefully we'll have time to connect at the end of the presentation. Otherwise, I will provide my email address to connect outside of the presentation. And then at the very end, I will entrust you with my vision for how this work can extend beyond this session and create a movement for educational reform from the inside out. So welcome to the phone number that just joined. And I just put in the chat if it's accessible to you to complete this poll, great. And if it's not, no worries. It's just some information that could promote discussion, but if you it's not safe to complete it while listening, that's totally fine. There is also, these slides will be made available afterwards, and of course you can come back to the recording. So a little bit about me. When I graduated from college, I taught French in a public high school in Washington, D.C. And there I saw the effects of childhood trauma and systemic oppression daily without understanding the layered nuances of what my students and I were experiencing. After only 3 years, I went to the other side, an affluent independent school just 6 miles outside the city, but worlds away in terms of access to opportunities and evidence of extreme privilege. Their cycles of trauma were evident in the pressures of perfectionism and achievement perpetuated both by parents and teachers inside and outside of the classroom. I spent several years working in the Department of Teaching and Learning to support educators financially in engaging in professional development opportunities that would enrich their craft. And I saw firsthand how treating educators like professionals and supporting their visions led to some of the most innovative teaching I have ever witnessed. I made my way to Sacramento in 2019 and worked at an independent school for 2 years when the pandemic shifted everything we knew to be possible within the education system. When we had opportunities to reinvent how we taught and how students learned, instead, our leadership forced us back into how things have always been. That led to extreme burnout, which resulted in the difficult decision I made to leave the classroom after 13 years. Throughout my time in middle and high school classrooms, I watched my colleagues, some of the most brilliant, compassionate, and hardworking individuals, consistently get to work early, stay late, skip lunch, take work home on the weekends, and spend their own money on necessary supplies. Raise his hand. I started learning about complex trauma in 2022 and began my doctoral journey in the fall of 2023. And my intention is to merge my personal experience with my professional and academic understanding of how complex trauma shows up in educators' lives to help transform the way we support our educators and sustain them in lifelong careers. And again, if you're still filling out the poll, fantastic. If you haven't gotten to it yet, no worries, but it is there in the chat for you. The information I'm sharing today primarily comes from the NARM Training Institute, which stands for the Neuroaffective Relational Model. It is rooted in psychotherapy, and much of the information I share is in their two published works, as well as from their online basics training. I participated in the OBT for over 6 months with over 60 contact hours with counselors, educators, healthcare professionals, coaches, and spiritual advisors. NARM's work combines the top-down neuroscientific approaches with bottom-up somatic experiences by centering the healing that occurs with trauma-informed relationships and care. And for more information, I highly recommend checking out their work, which I'll provide at the end as well. And a quick side note is that the term trauma informed has become kind of a buzzword, and it has some other variations like trauma supportive. And because this institute certified me as a trauma informed professional, I will use that term throughout the presentation because to me it means having studied complex trauma in depth from a psychotherapeutic perspective to apply to other contexts. So now we get into the big why that drives the work I am doing. So I shared my personal story and then I asked you to complete a short poll. So I'm skipping for now and I just want to see. Oh, of course, now it's going to make me do it. Okay, well, we're not going to watch me log into this, but basically what I asked you all to do was take a look at these 8 statements and rank them in order of how much they apply to your life and or how much you resonate with them. So for instance, if I foreclose awareness and an expression of personal needs to focus on the needs of others is very prevalent in your life, it would be up here, all the way falling down to the end here. Now, this is just the order that I put it in. Since I forgot to log in, I won't be able to see the responses, but if I have time at the end, I will do that. So these are some of the indicators that potentially complex trauma is showing up in our lives in the present day. All right.
Carrie, you may have mentioned this, but a quick question. Why the term, the phrase complex trauma versus just trauma?
I'm about to get into that.
Oh, cool.
Yes. All right. So you can see from the variety of sources on the slide that educator burnout is a national problem, which has already led to anxiety, a great resignation, and decreased well-being in educators. What you don't see on this slide is the ripple effect this has for the communities surrounding these burnt out educators. Most of us go into this profession because we love the kids. Maybe we had a caregiver or a teacher in our life who put us on this path, or we felt the call to educate in a different way than how we were taught. That curiosity for and seeking of knowledge, connection, and joy should be at the center of everything we do because we do it for the kids. We should be free to create and ideate, make mistakes, and collaborate, allowing our students to do the same. Instead, teachers are faced with new initiatives, long hours, and pressure from parents and administration, all wrapped up in a system that benefits from hours of unpaid labor. And it is my most fervent hope that by introducing trauma-informed care, we can transform the communities and the systems that have held us hostage for too long. So before we get into the next section, I invite you to be with your experience in this moment. And that could look like just sitting up, maybe taking a look away from the screen, reminding yourself where you are, that you've got your body supported. And notice if there's any thoughts, ideas, or memories that have come up since we started the presentation. If closing your eyes or lowering your gaze helps, you're invited to do that as well. So if it's available to become aware of your internal world, maybe you'll start to notice some feelings or sensations. As we go through this material, see if it's possible to retain 50% of your awareness on your internal experience as 50% of your attention remains on the slides. We're about to get into the psychoeducation, which your brain may want to rush to dissect or dispute. So the invitation is to see if you can also stay present with any feelings and sensations that may provide additional information. My goal in sharing this information is not to focus on the disconnection caused by complex trauma, but to shed light on it so we can better understand why reconnection is so challenging. And I want to preface by reminding you that I have a background in education, not psychotherapy. And while I am a trained trauma-informed professional, my role here is not to be an expert or offer diagnoses. NARM is not a goal-oriented model focused on fixing. It is an inquiry-based model that supports connection. So my intention is to help you become more attuned to your own internal worlds as I educate you on complex trauma and how it may affect you and your educational community. So back to Athea's question, why complex trauma? What is it? Adverse childhood experiences lead to disconnection from what we most want for ourselves. Trauma is not something that can be prevented in life. We need to meet the consequences of reality and the pain that comes with that. Many of us grew up in loving families where all our basic needs were met, so we don't feel like anything bad enough happened to us to constitute trauma. And this is a gentle reminder that our caregivers are humans too, with their own capabilities for relational and emotional support that may not have been adequate for us to navigate big feelings and make sense of them. For some of us, experiences of not being listened to, being told that only certain emotions or expressions of sentiment were okay, or being fixed as a child were causes for disconnection from our core needs. The diagrams on the left of the slide show the difference between shock trauma, which usually involves an isolated incident that elicits deep fear that provokes a response, and developmental or complex trauma, which occurs throughout childhood and affects our developing sense of self, which infuses certain behaviors and feelings with a sense of shame. So some experiences from my own childhood that I can share include wanting to be a writer, but being told that I needed to do something practical with my life. Dressing in my brother's hand-me-downs to be cool, and then being told I was too much of a tomboy. Or if I didn't complete chores right away, there was a narrative of laziness, or I needed to do something because they said so. And I share these personal anecdotes to show that even with the best intentions of those around me, I have developed deep narratives around practicality, appearance, and hierarchy that I am still working to unravel. And these are examples of how complex or developmental, attachment, or relational trauma, what they are, and then how they create shame around a developing sense of self. So when we grow up in a home where our core needs are met by attuned caregivers, we retain access to core needs for connection, attachment, trust, autonomy, and love and sexuality. Complex trauma arises when there is attachment or relational failure that leads to disconnection from that core need. As a result, we developed a compromised ability or capability to connect, attune to trust, to be autonomous, and to experience healthy love and sexuality. So, trauma is not only about what happened to us in the past, it's about the adaptations to those experiences that we carry forward into adulthood. With the examples I shared earlier, I've become aware of my immediate need to squash creativity in favor of doing something practical. I have this warring desire to appear how I want with a fear of how I'll be perceived. And I have a lot of self-shaming tendencies around rest and power dynamics. So this presentation, again, helps us understand how these typical adaptive survival strategies that present themselves in educators are keeping us from accessing the love, attunement, trust, autonomy, and love and sexuality that, I meant connection, attunement, trust, autonomy, and love and sexuality that are core human needs. So this diagram has a lot going on, and I'm going to walk you through it. This shows the diminishment and distortion of aliveness through the autonomy and attunement survival styles. So we're going to start from the bottom up. NARM identifies that we develop healthy expressions of curiosity, aggression, independence, and love throughout our childhood from pre-birth to around 6 years old. And we're focusing particularly on the period of 6 months to 1.5 years for that attunement survival style, and then 2 to 4 years of age with that autonomy survival style. So as you move up each of those cones that are representing this core energy or life force, you see how they get diminished as they get closer to the top. And what you see is that as we have these attachment or environmental failures that disrupt the connection to open curiosity or autonomy, we have these sympathetically dominant symptoms, which are presented through the center of the chart. And then we have these parasympathetically dominant symptoms that present on the top of the chart. So this results in that adaptive survival strategy, which we are talking about at the top of the chart, attunement and autonomy. And NARM discusses 5 main strategies, but for this presentation and audience, we will focus on attunement and autonomy. So let's focus in on attunement. When I learned about this, it absolutely floored me. It gave me language for how I had felt my entire life and allowed me to begin the very slow process of reconnecting to my needs. So take a moment to look at the progression of this survival style, where we again start at the bottom and work our way up as we recognize how the life force diminishes with these sympathetically dominant and parasympathetically dominant symptoms. And I invite you to retain that 50% awareness both on your personal experience and the information provided at this part of the presentation and throughout. So the attunement adaptive survival style is developed when children learn to give up their own needs to focus on the needs of others, particularly those of their caregivers. Doing chores because an authority figure said so is an example of how I often betrayed my own needs, such as for play or rest, in an attempt to meet my caregiver's needs. Examples like this can be reinforced throughout childhood and still present when we go into caregiving roles, thinking that is how we inadvertently will get our needs met. This may mean that when we become educators, we rush to meet the needs of everyone else over tending to our own needs. Raise his hands. My personal and professional experience has witnessed this in countless friends and colleagues, and my guess is that many of you may resonate with the information presented here. So again, just see if you can be present with your experience in this moment. People who identify with the attunement survival style may end up as an inhibited person who is proud of how little they need and how much they can do without. Or they may end up as an unsatisfied person who will not express needs and develops a tendency to be left with a chronic sense of unfulfillment or longing. As a recovering educator who identifies with the attunement adaptive survival style, I realize that developing my capacity to attune to my needs and emotions, as well as to recognize, reach out for, and take in physical and emotional nourishment, was essential in healing from the trauma that was reinforced by the education system. So, we're going to pause for a moment to check internally to see if anything came up while you learned about the attunement adaptive survival style. If any protest, fear, resignation, or depression have come up, allow yourself to experience it without needing to feel different in this moment. I'll invite you back to the screen as we conclude this portion by focusing now on the autonomy survival style. So this was brought to my attention by the co-author of the Practical Guide for Healing Developmental Trauma, who's one of the primary educators at the Neuroaffective Relational Model Training Institute. So once I started to dive in, I realized that it applied to so many educators that it also needed to be included in this conversation of healing from developmental and systemic trauma. Again, starting from the bottom of the diagram, notice if you or people you know as educators tend to identify with any of the sympathetically dominant or parasympathetically dominant symptoms on the screen. And again, notice how that life force diminishes as we move up. So as we continue to learn, I invite you to maintain that awareness on your experience. The autonomy adaptive survival style is developed when children learn to give up direct expressions of independence in order not to feel abandoned or crushed. Me dressing in my brother's hand-me-downs and being called too much of a tomboy is an example of my relationship with the autonomy survival style. I had to choose whether I would be authentic to myself or maintain connection by adapting my clothing in order to belong. Examples like this occur throughout childhood when children superficially go along with others' programs while holding hidden resentment. This shows up today in people-pleasing tendencies at the expense of our own expressions of integrity and autonomy. And this is particularly pervasive with educators or other caregivers who tend to link worth with duty and burden. Understanding that the education system does not encourage the balance of personal lives and professional pursuits helped to contextualize my burnout. It was not my fault that I had silenced my voice for so long to be compliant or that I overextended myself to please others. No wonder I was burnt out. Learning to set appropriate boundaries without feeling guilty has been transformational in healing from the trauma that was reinforced by the education system. I'll invite you to pause again and check in, see if anything came up while hearing about the autonomy adaptive survival style. You can close your eyes if that feels good. And just notice if there's any resistance, stress, sadness, and see what it would be like to experience it without needing to do anything about it. I'll invite you to come on back to the screen, opening up your eyes, because I'm about to show you an image. And I'd like you to look at it in detail as you take 5 slow, deep breaths. It's going to be a little tiny, but just notice where your eye is drawn as you practice breathing deeply. So this popped up on Twitter on March 20th, 2021. And the minute I saw it, I had a lot of feelings. So I'm curious if you are able to share in the chat, what did you notice? And it could be where your eye went first, maybe a memory that came up, a bodily sensation, or an emotion. So, to the extent that feels possible, knowing that all responses are valid, see what feels possible to share in the chat in the moment. Guns, heaviness. I've seen this image, I don't know, 100 times. And this time it was the right wrist of the educator that says, blame me. That's where my eye went. And I felt a lot of heaviness in like my throat and chest area when I saw that. My train of thought was this: guns, violence, increased mental health issues in schools, need for MBSL in schools. Thank you. Sadness. Thank you for sharing. So we're going to move on. And again, I'll just invite you to bring your attention to the screen. So if you resonate with any of the words on the slide, know that you are not alone. When we experience complex trauma that is perpetuated by a system that does not support a healthy connection to our needs and doesn't allow for a manageable work life balance, it's inevitable that feelings of disconnection and then shame around that disconnection will present themselves. So, again, to the extent that feels possible to share, as we were learning about this, take a moment and see if any of these words resonate with you. Just share it in the chat. Also reminds you of Atlas, that other picture. Yeah. So again, I'll just speak for myself if you're still speaking or writing in the chat, but yes, you got it. The first thing that always comes to mind is overwhelm. As soon as I learn about something new, there's this sense that I need to do something about it. I need to incorporate this material. I need to learn more. So that sense of overwhelm, of almost paralysis, like what do I do? Yeah, I see overwhelm again in the chat. So the good news is that we are concluding the psychoeducational portion, and we're going to be moving into strategies that move us toward reconnection and self-acceptance. And so what I'm offering here is a window into using the neuroaffective relational model to develop these skills both individually and relationally. And it's worthwhile to remember that since rupture, that disconnection from core needs, happened in relationship, the healing also needs to happen in relationship. So this can be with a licensed processor like a psychotherapist or a counselor, or with a trauma-informed professional working within their capacity and expertise. And this is not a quick fix. We have spent decades using these survival strategies that have benefited us. So it will take a long, long time to practice reconnecting to our core needs. So to begin to move away from adaptive survival strategies that have served us so well since childhood, we need to embody the internal states of curiosity, presence, and self-inquiry. After we explore each of these internal states, we'll go into experiential practice with the relational skills that are also on this slide, because all of this is a part of the application of the NARM relational model. So when we notice evidence of disconnection and shame, curiosity can be a helpful state to embody. Curiosity allows for openness, receptivity, flexibility. This brings in choice and agency we lacked as children and allows us to learn and unlearn. Both are really necessary for healing from complex trauma. This is the crew to have heard Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness, which is echoed in the NARM competencies listed on the slide. Quote, mindfulness is awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, unquote, to which he sometimes adds, quote, in the service of self-understanding and wisdom, end quote. So when disconnection and shame threaten to bring us back into survival strategies, coming back to the present moment where we can learn and unlearn with an open heart can begin to rewire deeply embedded patterns. Self-inquiry is the attention on the I. It's the invitation I've laid out throughout the presentation to maintain 50% of awareness on your internal state while keeping 50% of your awareness on the information being presented. Developing the ability to maintain independence emotionally within relational situations allows healing to become possible. So we'll pause for a moment and check in again with our own levels of curiosity, presence, and self-inquiry. So you can type in the chat which internal state is most accessible to you and which one is least accessible out of curiosity, presence, and self-inquiry. For me, I think curiosity is most accessible. And for me, presence is most challenging. Hmm. Curiosity and self-inquiry feel most accessible, and presence is challenging depending on the day. I get that. Thanks for sharing. All right. So the final part of this presentation will integrate the psychoeducation we received as we embody the internal states we just explored in an experiential practice where we will use these relational skills. And we've actually already done this throughout this presentation. So now you see on the screen each of the different relational skills starting from the top and moving clockwise around with sort of a guiding question to help practice that skill. So now we're going to go into some specific situations where you are going to develop these relational skills. As was true when I taught French, skills have to be practiced multiple times with a gradual increase in difficulty in order to progress. So I encourage you to practice curiosity, presence, and self-inquiry as we go through these practices in community. And then, however you choose to extend this practice beyond our time together, become aware of how these relational states or these internal states and relational skills can be practiced in your life after our time together. Oh, I have more to say, excuse me. Before we, when we went through attunement and autonomy adaptive survival styles, I invited us to pause to check in on our thoughts, ideas, and memories. So this was a chance to practice the neuroscientific or top-down approach. Learning about something that has affected you may have brought up feelings of shame or disconnection. We also practice tuning into our experience so we could weave in that somatic or bottom-up approach. So now we're going to practice these relational skills together, which weaves in that last component of the neuroaffective relational model. Each of the next 5 slides will have a situation on it relatively common in the education field. If it doesn't specifically apply to you, feel free to imagine yourself in another similar situation or adapt the language to be more applicable to your background. And I invite you to notice when patterns of disconnection and shame arise so you can practice developing the relational skills that will move you from adaptive survival strategies to present moment choice and agency. So as we go through each situation, I'll invite you to participate in the chat and or come off mute to discuss your experience. So thinking about curiosity, presence, and self-inquiry, we're going to practice attunement. So here's a situation. An administrator interrupts your lunch period to ask you to cover lunch duty since you're short-staffed that day. Your first instinct is to stop eating your lunch and spend the rest of the lunch period standing around hungry while the kids eat. So take a moment, maybe again, glance away from the screen, remind yourself where you are, feel yourself on the ground. And if you'd like to close your eyes or lower your gaze, we're going to practice quieting our minds. In reading this situation, give yourself time to attune to your own experience. Notice any thoughts, pressures, judgments, or strong impulses to act that may be creating more noise in your mind. You have permission to not immediately act on your impulses or their request to have you do something. You're invited to practice simply being with yourself. Connect to your curiosity, presence, and self-inquiry. You're invited to practice slowing down, using fewer words, and taking a pause before you respond. Be patient with yourself as you try a new way of attuning. Whenever you feel ready, you can blink open the eyes. And if you'd like to come off mute, I'm curious what came up when this situation was read, and then what was this practice of attunement like for you? You're also welcome to type it in the chat. All right, if we're ready to move on, I'm happy to move on. If anyone is still finishing up your thoughts or you'd like to come off mute, this will be the time to do it. Right. We're going to move into our next skill of acceptance. So, the situation is that your co teacher is leading an activity while you prepare for the next part of the day. You notice them doing something wrong, and your first instinct is to stop what you're doing to correct them at the expense of focusing on what you need to do. Take a moment, notice what came up for you as I read the situation. And then, if you'd like to tune into your own experience, I'll invite you to close the eyes again and allow yourself to truly hold a place of not knowing. Hold an open space to listen, take in, and let wash over you all that you experience. Notice the different aspects of what you're taking in around your story, beliefs, emotions, body, and the way you are in relationship with yourself. You're invited to practice beginner's mind with a lack of preconceptions and set beliefs. Notice any pressure to figure out, do something, fix, or get someplace other than where you are in this very moment. Give yourself time to explore this and how it reverberates with you. And whenever you're ready, coming back to this space, and I'll again invite you to either type in the chat what came up for you when the situation was read, what came up for you when I guided you through the acceptance practice, or maybe where you are right now, either typing in the chat or coming off mute.
So, Carrie, I'm going to come off mute and describe to you what I think you're asking. So, I think
Yeah.
about a situation like this and say a several year time span, and the several year old me would immediately want to jump in and try to fix the situation. But the me right now, I'm just totally cool doing my thing, letting them do their thing in that acceptance space, just really curious, like, well, maybe it's not wrong. Maybe there is a way that they're doing that, is more efficient or effective or something like that. And now I'm curious, being one of the first words here in the acceptance stream of this diagram, is what led me from that fixer to the acceptance. A lot of mindful work in between, generally speaking. But it's
Yeah.
interesting thinking about that, like historically. So I just wanted to share that. Don't know if that's what you were
Yeah.
asking, but
That's
yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much for sharing it.
yeah.
Yeah, there's no wrong answers. It's just what are you experiencing when this goes on? Because again, it's not about what happened, it's about how we move forward in our day-to-day life. And so if a certain version of you may have been the fixer, there is, like you said, curiosity, like, huh, I'm no longer that person anymore. I've moved into a place of acceptance with this mindful work to recognize that that first instinct, maybe it still pops up from time to time, but you've come to a place of having practiced this skill already. So I appreciate you sharing.
Which is also kind of cool to just steep yourself in, oh, look, there's growth.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is nice because this is intangible stuff. So when you have just like
Yeah.
that little glimmer of like, oh, I've done something new, like that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Thank
So I
you.
appreciate that process. Thank you.
Nice. All right, we'll move on to the next situation. So we're going to practice some reflection and exploration, thinking about being on your way out the door to enjoy your afternoon, and a colleague asks for a favor that requires you to stay longer. Your first instinct is to say yes, and then seethe in your car ride home about how you never have enough time for yourself. So, if it feels accessible to close your eyes and you want to listen to some of these guiding questions, go for it. Give yourself some space and time to reflect on how you organize your internal world without straining to figure anything out or to connect the dots. Notice the various levels of your experience and what draws your attention. From this place, what do you become curious about? What seems important here? What might be a priority to explore now? What might be bookmarked for later exploration? As you move forward, you're invited to see if you can adjust your understanding as new information presents itself. I'll invite you back to the screen. And again, let me know what this experience was like. What did the situation provoke? What did the practice provoke? To the extent that it feels possible and safe to share, of course. In the interest of time, I might move forward, but we do have two more situations that you are invited to participate in. Okay. So, with curiosity, presence, and self inquiry, let's practice a mindful intervention. The situation is that students are working in groups to both accomplish a task and practice cooperation. You see a group struggling, and your first instinct is to intervene. Another voice inside you counsels you to be patient and let the students figure it out. You struggle internally. So, bringing attention to that internal world, you can close down the eyes and just reflect. What are you hoping to elicit by using a specific intervention? How do you respond to it? What is the impact of this intervention? How does this impact what you really want for yourself and for your students? Notice if the intervention supports connection and disidentification from the adaptive survival strategy, or if it reinforces disconnection and identification with old strategies. Can you stay open to learning rather than pressuring yourself to figure out what to do next? Adjust your way of engaging to ensure that you are open, curious, and humble. Coming back to the screen if you'd like to share about your experience. All right. Oh, I see in the chat the middle path of asking the students questions comes up for me. Thank you for sharing. That's a nice way of offering a third possibility here, that one voice says intervene, another voice says let them be, and then this middle path appears to say that if I ask the students question and maybe provoke curiosity or self-inquiry in them, then maybe there's another way forward. Thank you for that. Let's move on to our last situation, and then we're going to be wrapping up and we can have a more open conversation if you feel called. So, we're thinking about integration, and our situation is you have the day off and you have nothing on your calendar or to do list. You are so excited to just be with yourself and focus on your interests. And your first instinct is to clean or grade or organize or plan or run errands. Fill in the blank. So take a moment, bring that attention internally, and take your time. Slow down. Shift your active doing mindset to a receptive being state. If you shift away from states of connection and expansion into disconnection and contraction, notice how you relate to this. If you're putting pressure on yourself to make something happen, fill your time, and not actually rest, see if you can bring more presence to what is happening without the need to control or direct. Ask yourself how it is to be present with yourself. And one final invitation to come back to the screen, typing in the chat or coming off mute. Let me know, how did this land for you? And I'll say for myself, this is one of my biggest challenges, is giving myself space and then immediately filling that space. And it's hard to integrate all of these other skills if I don't give myself the space to do that.
Well, I'd like to share again. These situations, these reflections have just, shed some light on this growth through the mindfulness practices the last several years. In- I don't know what it is in particular about them or the last several years for me and looking at these situations. I just think, with mindfulness practices, there are always layers coming, peeling back, I guess. We've heard a lot about peeling layers. And I think about how these situations aren't as front and center in my life right now, and this version of myself where I was even just thinking several years ago. So it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's affirming to see, and to reflect and go through this process, like just to slow down and think about it, right? And oftentimes we think about it, I want to grow, or what does this growth look like? And it just was this huge aha moment through the whole time this evening. Wow, that's been quite a journey, because I remember this old version of myself, and I'm so grateful I'm not activated in that way as much anymore. It still comes up, but my awareness of that old version of myself wanting to come into action it's much more immediate. Like I'm aware of, oh, there's that, don't want to go there. And here's the boundary I'm putting down. Here's, the direction I'm going to take because this is a healthier version of me and how I can show up in the world. So I say that because it's just an interesting reflection process too. And I really appreciate that because framed in that way, I hadn't thought about even the growth in that way until I've just been sitting here with you in this wonderful presentation. So grateful for you and the work, Carrie. Thank you.
Thanks, Sophia. I really appreciate hearing that. And in the interest of time, I'll just move forward and wrap up. So where does this leave us? So I am in my second year of my doctoral journey, but my intention is to research the prevalence of educators who identify with attunement and or autonomy adaptive survival styles. And I have this vision for creating a curriculum based on this relational model to help educators become aware of these adaptive survival strategies and move more toward connection. And the hope is that in partnership with educators, I can practice and refine this curriculum and then eventually share it with current, future, present educators to reduce burnout and connection. So thank you all so much. If you are interested in talking more about this topic, have additional resources to consider or partnerships to embark upon, my email address is on the bottom of the screen. And if you're interested in learning more about the neuroaffective relational model, the website is narmtraining.com, which I put in the chat. And you can learn more. They do this online basics training for anyone who is in helping professions. And I want to thank Kazem, of course, for giving me the opportunity to entrust my vision of how this work can extend beyond this session and create a movement for educational reform. And thank you to Athea for all the behind the scenes and in front of the scenes support. And thank you all for coming and deepening your understanding of complex trauma and how we can start to move toward reconnection.
Thank you, Carrie. I just want to take a minute to open the floor for any questions. Certainly, this has been recorded. We'll post this on our member site if you'd like to get PD or CEU credits. I will send that link tomorrow via email. Attendance forms will go out via email tomorrow as well. So please check your email inbox and fill those forms out. And any feedback, thoughts, questions, inquiries for the next. It is right at 8 o'clock, so I'll say 30 seconds just to say we have a hard stop because I know everybody has lives and amazing things that they're doing and putting boundaries in place and making sure we're protecting that time for ourselves. So I'll quiet down, see if we have any questions or thoughts.
Thank you all for sitting in silence for a lot of this presentation. It's actually really lovely. We don't get a chance to do that very much, and there was no need to fix it. It just was allowed to be. So I appreciate you giving yourselves that time for reflection and contemplation.
Yeah, agreed. I want to echo that because I don't think if you had given that space, I wouldn't have gone through this reflection process and had those aha moments. So thank you.
Yeah, it was funny when we did this training, they kept saying how like people who identify with the attunement survival strategy are the ones who come off mute first because they're uncomfortable with silence. They want to like make sure the instructor feels good. And I know that I was one of those kids and still am as a doctoral student where I'm like, oh, you have a question for me? I will answer it so we don't have to sit here and you don't have to, be uncomfortable. And I'm practicing not doing that. So it was really nice to just be like, yep, if no one wants to talk, that's totally cool.
Yes, it's super great. I can see a whole full workshop doing this. I would love to have you do more of this. But thank you guys so much. Really appreciate you, Carrie, and your presence here this evening. I hope you guys have a wonderful evening and look out for the email I'll send tomorrow by the end of the week. And hope you guys have a great start to your weekend. So bye everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.